after Xavier's talk, I have a question that wasn't in my questions that I sent you. And
Those
so
are the best kind.
I'm just gonna throw it out there.
Let's do it.
Okay, so my question is, I'm thinking a lot about that word urgency. And I know that both of you, for perhaps obvious, not so obvious reasons, come to diversity work broadly defined, maybe differently defined for different reasons. And so I'd love to hear from you what feels urgent to you about this work, about this conversation. What feels urgent to you about it, and why are you here? Other than the fact that I invited you. Hey, let's have a conversation in front of 100 people.
Yeah, am I good? I think
Yeah, you're working,
awesome.
you're on.
So what feels urgent to me personally, I think a lot of my definitions of things, and I love the idea that our definitions need to evolve and grow, because for me, I feel like so much of my education has been completely on the fly, zero lived experience around many of these terms, and so it feels very urgent is to just raise the volume of the conversation among white people, right? There's so much opportunity for people who have tremendous privilege to engage this conversation, and a lot of what I've seen and experienced, quite frankly, is a fear that we're going to say the wrong thing, that we're going to offend people even more than we already have and all of our ancestors have. And so I think there's just an urgency of turning up the volume on that conversation.
That's good. What about you, Kelly?
Have you turned on the news?
Right.
It's like dumpster fire nation. So I think the last few years have really crystallized that we have not gotten as far as we would like to believe we've gotten. And we're at the point where it's like all hands on deck, because what's going on here domestically has implications for the world. And if we don't figure this out soon, it's going to be a lot worse. You look up, we don't talk about it, but 1 in 5 children in this country is born multiracial. And so we are having like 1978 conversations about race, and we have to catch up really, really quick, because the consequences of our inaction are real.
Oh, thanks.
That's how I got the invitation. It's like, oh shoot, grab the final string of people who could come in and help. So,
oh gosh,
stop it.
Okay, so you two met in a thing called EO. You both don't have to answer this because one of you can answer it. But what is EO, and how did you become friends?
EO is Entrepreneurs Organization, so it's a group of for-profit businesses all over the world, actually, and they have local chapters. And so we met in the Atlanta chapter of EO, actually in their accelerator program. So for businesses either in the early stages or just starting out, looking to grow and kind of reach that next stage. So we met there.
I could tell when I met him that he was a woke white dude. And I collect woke white dudes.
I have a t-shirt.
Every time. Yeah. I was like, ooh, I see the woke white dude radar. My woke white dude radar is tingling. I was like, he's going to be my friend.
Oh my goodness. Well, you told that's not the story you told me last time.
That's the real story.
That's the okay.
No, but he had made a comment about his daughter, who was a toddler, probably not even a toddler, had fallen, and he had said, come on, honey, get up, dust her off, not like coddling her and saying, oh, baby. He's like, no, girlfriend, let's do this. I'm like, yeah, I like that. I was taking notes.
My wife's sobbing in the corner.
Oh,
This is happening.
right. But I was just kind of collecting notes. I could tell that he was progressive and was progressive thinking. And then we just stayed in touch after I had exited out of EO. He was still in EO, but we still kept in touch.
Awesome. And so I know you both have been really intentional about your friendship. And I want to know why. Because, just why have you been so intentional about your friendship and about building your cross-cultural, cross-racial friendships in general?
For me personally, it doesn't happen any other way. Right, the way for myself, as I looked around to friends that I had and the community that I'd built, and it was just full of people like me, and I wasn't okay with that. And when I started looking around, okay, well, why is that? And I looked at the school that I grew up in, the life that I lived, and I was like, okay, well, if I'm going to actually experience and it broaden my definition and be better, then I have to be active. It's not a passive thing. And I think that in and of itself is privilege. I heard somebody speak, and they were talking about the difference between white people in this whole conversation is they have a choice. It's like, shit. Okay, well then it has to be deliberate. and then I've realized kind of through this journey that it's worth doing, right? And those two things combine really well for me personally. Work that's worth doing, deliberate effort over time. Like, okay, there's math here that I like, and then along the way I get to just hang out with awesome people. It's not very selfless, I guess. I win in this equation. So, yeah, I don't think it happens any other way for people in the world that I've grown up in.
And I think that's especially true in the South. I grew up in Jersey, and so growing up in New Jersey, you had ethnic whites, right? So you had blacks, and you had Puerto Ricans and Dominicans, and then you had Irish and Polish and Italian. And being around ethnic whites is very different than being around Southern whites. Like, seriously, like the whiteness is super like pervasive. And because you don't have people who identify with ethnicity, it's really, they just identify with like kind of status quo whiteness, it's very, very difficult to penetrate those networks because we remain hyper-segregated in the South, and it is normalized. So we don't even think twice about it, being in wholly black spaces or wholly white spaces. I'm super impressed when I go to events and they're mixed. I'm like, oh, snap, okay, good job. Because in Atlanta, that's super difficult to do. And I've been here over 20 years. And so I think that's exactly right. You have to be intentional about building cross-racial relationships, or chances are they will not happen. And I'm talking about the kind of friends that you have that are in your text message. I'm not talking about the friends that you have in your inbox. Those are different friends. I'm talking about that, hey girl, what's going on? Oh my God, I'm having a bad day. I'm about to choke somebody. Those friends, right?
Okay, so can you? I didn't prepare you with this question either because I added this one in yesterday.
Just throw all the questions.
All of them that I just made
Put
up.
those over there.
But I want to know, can you share about a time when you had to talk really explicitly about racism, power, privilege in a professional setting?
Yesterday?
Well, I want to know.
No. You go first.
Yeah. And it might be, I haven't done that. That's fine too. But I'm just curious.
So I'm very active on LinkedIn. That's like my social media the only place that I go deep. And it's very, LinkedIn in particular is very conservative. These conversations are not really being had. Race conversations are not being had in these kind of social professional spaces. But yeah, I'm constantly having a conversation about race. I have a show on Mondays called Mondays with Kelly where we were talking about going deep on this conversation around equity, and that was in one of the questions. So
was that part? Oh, okay.
That one.
Go ahead, yeah.
But I did a post on equity and how I come from the nonprofit space, and we've been having conversations around equity for like the last 15 years, but the concept has been co-opted by corporate and startup spaces, and they have no idea what the word equity means. And it's incredibly frustrating, right? We all see the little cartoon of the kids at the ballpark, and one is in a little box, and the other guy's in there. And that's fine, right? But at the heart of that is resources, right? If we're talking about leveling the playing field, you got to bring some more dirt to fill in the holes. And so I use this analogy how you have two glasses, and one is full, and one is only a little bit at the bottom. But equity means you take the water bottle and you pour water into the glass that has a little bit. If we're having conversations about equity, we got to talk about resources. If you're not bringing any resources to the table, it's not equity. You're talking about something else, but it's not equity. And that's where we get stuck, because people think that if I'm giving something to you, that means you got to take something from me, right? So it's a zero sum. And we also think that where we are in life is a function of our own merit and our own worthiness, and we haven't in this society had honest conversations about the extent to which that is true, right? So this is what we knew. No, black children enter the world with 1/10 the inherited wealth of white children. That's before they have a chance to be good, do well, go to school, make the right choices. White kids enter the world with 10 times the inherited wealth, 10 times. But then when we get to the workplace, we want to have a conversation around merit, when that wealth enabled them to be born in a good hospital, grow up in a good neighborhood, go to a really good public school or private school, get private tutors, right? But then when you have the black kid who came from the inner city Chicago compared with the white kid who had everything that 10 times the inherited wealth can deliver to you as a human being, we want to talk about merit and equality? Doesn't make sense, right? So those are the conversations that I'm happy to have in public spaces where nobody else is talking about it.
So the answer to your question is 5 seconds ago. In it. Yeah, I love it. I think for me, it's honestly, I have the honor to serve on 2 executive teams. So if there's a graph, right, like white dude, I'm the tall bar on the right side, right? And what I've been most proud of is the executive team at New Story. So we're a nonprofit looking to end global homelessness, and we realized pretty early on that it's freaking hard. We jokingly think like we could have just picked something cheaper to do. Homes are expensive. But we realized, okay, well, what gives us the most leverage to have an impact over time? And so we looked at great team members and things like merit, and we kept kind of circling around diversity and inclusion in a way that, I would say early on, we knew that it was something worth investing in. And over the last probably 2.5 years, it has become something that is baked into the way that we think about things and how we approach things. And so most of the conversations that we've had, or that I've been a part of, have been in the room with the 5 executive team members, 2 of which are female, 1 of which is a woman of color. And early on, I'm ashamed to say that she kind of represented the voice of people who were underrepresented in our company and then outside of our company. And then since then, the team has really leaned into our hiring processes and what kind of space are we making. And the team is doubling almost year over year. And we realized pretty early on that if we aren't just going to end up with more people like us, then we have to change the way that we're thinking about almost everything. Mm-hmm. And so that comes up quite a bit. Now it's coming up in a way that we're just a little more informed, right? There's so much learning and relearning to be done. But it's hard because you're trying to do really good, meaningful work in a way that is also good and meaningful and adds value and dignity to people. And so New Story executive team.
Yeah, so what I hear both of you ultimately saying is, we talk about it all the time. Mm-hmm. And I think that's kind of something that is really, I think that's just really important. Like, it's not a thing, it has to be ongoing, constant, consistent, and that's how it becomes something that's baked into everything that you do. Kelly, when we last talked in preparation for this conversation, you said this quote that you have to build a bridge. What was the quote?
You have to build a bridge of trust to bear the weight of truth.
Yes, you have to build a bridge of trust to bear the weight of truth. Mm-hmm. So as you're talking about equity, resources, the reality, the urgency of this work, mm-hmm. that's a lot of truth telling. Mm-hmm. And so how do you go about building that trust? And then even how do you evaluate who, because obviously like I'm guessing on LinkedIn, you don't have trust with I don't know, just talk to me about that a little bit.
Yeah, I feel that oftentimes in these spaces when we have these conversations, they're very heady conversations, right? So we bring in the concepts like unconscious bias and systemic racism and whiteness. It's almost like you have to have a college education to even be able to engage a conversation around diversity. And it can be very marginalizing and isolating for people who don't have alphabet soup behind their name, right? And so when I mean, really, and because it makes us feel smart. And that's another conversation, that's a rabbit hole. But I think that's fine. But at the same time, when I think about the most, open-hearted conversations that I have, it's with people that I trust. It's with white dudes that I trust. I have one mentor who I know wakes up to Fox News every single day, okay? And I know he has some things that he needs to work out, but he loves him some Kelly, and I love him some him. So he can say inelegant things around me because I know that he's a good person and he volunteers with the kids every single day. And I can say, that wasn't the best way to say that. He's like, all right, Kelly, help me out, right? But we can have that conversation because we trust one another. And we don't create enough spaces where we can forge trust, because if I don't fundamentally trust you, I don't care what you're saying to me, right? You can say, it's going right past me. Because I'm like, I don't trust you. Everything that anyone has ever told me about you or people like you are that you are boom, 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 boom. So I don't trust you, and I don't know any different, right? And so because our communities are so hyper-segregated, we have to lean on our stereotypes. And if we don't have personal relationships that confront that, then, it makes these conversations for naught. So I'm happy to talk about unconscious bias and systemic racism. We can go all day on that. But at the end of the day, if we're not forging heart-to-heart connections with people, then that's going right over people's heads.
So I have a question for you, Morgan. It's different. Asked Kelly about trust. I want to ask you about fear, because that's something that we also talked about. And I would imagine that for some people in this room, it's one thing to sit in a room and just listen to other people talk about it, but it's another thing to be sitting in the actual interaction where you just said something absurd or someone else is responding to something, and then all the feelings. I don't know. I have a lot of feelings, and so how do you process the fear that you have felt in the past when it comes to talking about race, racism, power, privilege, these sorts of things, especially cross-culturally?
Yeah, absolutely. So it sits kind of front of mind for me specifically on this topic because, there's just the gap between like my blind spots, what I know I don't know, and where I believe I should be as a human by this age, right? It's so vast. I think the first thing that started to kind of push me over the edge a little bit in the conversation was recognizing that the default is doing nothing, right? When we are afraid, we always have an option of just don't do it. And it's really easy in my situation to just do nothing about this. And quite frankly, I stand a lot to gain by doing absolutely nothing, right? In many cases, especially early on, but it's continually front of mind because the conversation is evolving just as fast as I'm trying to learn things, that I could just do nothing. And I think the type of person I would be if I just did nothing fears me, is more of a fear than, sticking my foot in my mouth, which I will say, my parents will admit, I've done that a lot of my life of just like saying stuff, you're like, we don't talk about that, right? Or bringing things up. But yeah, for me, as I look at my life and kind of where I live, the context is business, technology, social impact, and you can't live at the intersection of those three very long before you realize the problem that we have with diversity and inclusion. And I was like, okay, well, am I just going to live my career ignoring the elephant in the room? That is maybe more concerning. Like, what type of problem solver would I be if I just ignored the biggest problem? And I think that fear helped push, but there's still this certain, even being here now, I'm like, cool, the white guy gets another microphone. Like, that's a real fear, right? Yeah. And that is a thought that's echoing through people's minds. It's echoing through my own head. And one thing that's helped is just owning it. One of the first conversations that Kelly and I had was around educating software engineers. It's a big passion of mine. I fundamentally believe the hiring problem that we have with engineering would be solved if we just tapped into a more diverse workforce. The humans are there, right? That's not the problem. And so we began that conversation. And so I just shared, like, here are my thoughts and concerns. And I was open to the fact that she may hear me and be like, you're an idiot, go home. That's not what has happened. And the more I take a step and am met with and welcomed, and take a step and am welcomed in some way, and then taught in other ways and learning things, it makes it easier, but it has by no means gone away. And in some ways, the stakes are just getting higher because now it's like, oh, cool, now I have conversations with people who in some way are like, oh, cool, I can lean on Morgan for questions and help. It's like, cool, now I can't screw that up either, and what do I do? So it doesn't go away, but really what's the alternative? And I think I'm more afraid of that.
Yeah. So last couple questions here before we land the plane. Kelly, when you look at conversations on equity, I mean, your experience is so vast, and I could interview you all day, honestly, because you've had so much experience. But where do you think the conversation needs to go next? And maybe not conversation, but where do you think the work needs to go next as it relates to equity? Like, just tell me what you think.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I do think it's the work, right? I'm at a place, and maybe because I've been in this work for so long, I'm so tired of talking about, I'm like, when are we going to do something? Like, what is action? Can we have a decade of action? Like, one whole decade of trying to figure out, like, how do we right these wrongs? Hundreds and hundreds of years of accumulated wrong. And it's going to take real dedicated action. So yeah, for me, it's like, what does action look like? And how do we create some spaces that really enable us to move somewhere? And how do we really bring some resources to bear? This came up in a conversation that we were having online about, the extent to which there is enough, whether there's abundance and there's this deficit and scarcity. Like, this country created 21 billionaires this year, 21 billionaires. The number of billionaires has increased 50% since 2010. There is enough. There is enough. It's our ideas about who should get what. That's what we really have to tackle, like the narratives that we've been handed down. We have to interrogate the stories we've been told about who deserves what and how money is made and generated in this country and who deserves the resources. So those are the conversations that I want to have, like conversations around resources, work around resources, the redeployment and reallocation of resources. That's the work that I want to be a part of.
So my last question is, what is one characteristic, and I love both of you to speak into this, what is the number one characteristic of a leader who is well positioned to create a culture that promotes dignity and diversity?
A characteristic of the leader?
Yeah, number one characteristic. I'm thinking people in this room, I asked earlier, like, what kind of leader are you becoming? And so what's one thing that they could become or work towards if they don't possess it already?
Jump in. You go ahead.
You got it?
I got to answer for everything. I'm a know-it-all, so I have something to say about everything. But you go first.
Yeah, I would say from the perspective of the bearded white dude, humility.
Yep.
And I'm not saying, oh, look how humble I am. Continual, like over and over again, being willing to say, I surrender my instincts here, right? What like viscerally I think is the answer. I just have to be okay with the fact that, hey, you might not be right? You've grown up in a system that has taught you one way. That surrendering my instincts is something that it keeps echoing in my head. Right? Like you can trust them in most places in life, and sure, maybe one day this will bite me in the butt. But around these areas, to realize that I don't freaking know. I don't have the answer. I need to be a learner, and I need to be willing to just say, hey, I'm not going to have the answer here. I'm willing to make mistakes. And I don't know, that's for some people, there are people I know that are just like, they hear that and they're like, yeah, that's life, Morgan. That's not a life that I've had to live in. And so continually reminding myself that, hey, this is not my space. I've been invited in. And much like a house that we've been invited into, we shouldn't jump on the furniture. And the way that we behave at our own house probably isn't appropriate. And we need to be reshaping the way that we think about things. And all of that really comes back to humility. And at New Store, we have a value that is the humble pursuit of excellence. And I think that really, for me, sums it up on this topic, which is, it's not humility and just like saying, okay, well, somebody else is going to figure it out, right? I don't have to have the answer. Somebody else is going to speak up. Saying, no, I'm like doing this in pursuit of something much greater, but recognizing for me in my path, the answer is actually more often than not to just sit back, listen, maybe ask some more questions, not rush to judgment. And if in other areas of my life, people hire me to like take action and make decisions, then it's like, cool, here, it's going to be different. And being okay with that, it just undermines so much of what I was raised to believe is valuable. And I just have to sit in that.
Yeah. That was going to be my one, so it's good. See, we're here. But the other one I'd say is curiosity, right? I heard this anti-racism activist say this several years ago, and it stuck with me, but he said that white people are the only ones who can have no understanding of other people's lived experiences, and there are no social consequences for it. Right? So white folks can live their entire lives and not understand anything about anyone else. And there are no economic consequences. There are no social consequences. I would tell you, if you ask any black person in here who is, north of 18 years old, had going through education, you have to learn how white people operate in order to survive. Because a lot of spaces, whether it's higher education or corporate merit, they are culturally white. And white people don't know it because it's the water in which you swim. It's the air in which you breathe. But those spaces are culturally white. And we have to learn how to survive if we are going to aspire to anything in a white man's world, right? So that's truth. So what we need is for white folks to just get a little more curious about other people's lived experience. Because when we tell you how we feel and where we're coming from, if that's not your experience, then it's like, nah, that doesn't resonate with me. Well, it doesn't resonate with you because it's not your lived experience. So I will say that, and then I'll say to my black and brown brothers and sisters, we have to be able to handle their curiosity. Right? With love. And I think black folks in particular are so tired. And like, get it together, white folks. But that being said, we have to figure it out. We have to figure out how to hold space for that curiosity in a way that does not shut people down. Because I'm at a point in my career where I've been doing this long enough, I don't need to be right. I need some wins. I need progress. I don't need to be right. My ego does not need to be right. I need some wins from my folks. That's what I need. I need progress, right? So I think as black and brown folks, we need to kind of transmute some of that pain so that we can hold space for our white brethren and sisters' curiosity.
Oh, that's so good. I'm very challenged. I'm like, okay, I didn't know you were going to say. No, that's great. It's so good. Oh, thank you.
You knew what she was giving.
I know.
Okay.
I was like, I'm giving Kelly a mic. This is great. Thank you. That was my last question. Thank you so much. Yeah.